Good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this morning's webinar, Getting to the Start Line of the Race to Net Zero. This is a midpoint foundation and pillar of Enterprise Ireland's week of net zero events. So thank you for joining us, and in particular, thank you to those who've joined out of curiosity, and a warm welcome too for those who have joined because what we might call the green wave has already reached you. In all cases, I'd like to assure you that your participation today will be rewarded. It will be time well spent, and just to put out a little bit more pressure on our speakers. As some of you will know, my name is John Hunt, and I'm the Overseas Construction Lead for Enterprise Ireland, based out of our London office. And if I may, I'd like to start the session with a key message. So at one level, yeah, this is a webinar about climate action, and I recognize that for some, that's a term that might seem unconnected to you or to your business. We might automatically take the mental leap to the physical risks of climate change, the ice caps, the sea levels, the extreme weather events, and so on. And if that's the case for you, then for the next hour or so, could I ask you not to think of today's session as about climate change or even about sustainability. Instead, I'd like to reset the conversation, to introduce another term. So today, I'd like you to think not of or not just of the physical risks, but of the transitional risks. And when I say transitional risks, I mean the risks to your business from your clients, your employees, your investors, your suppliers that could be setting a future course, a course to net zero emissions, but without you. In other words, my message today is that the context in which your business currently operates is changing, and you'll need to make a considered strategic response. So don't stand still. Our governments, our regulators, the industry are working to or ahead of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC's timeline of 45% emission reductions by 2030 and net zero emissions, as we all know, by 2050. And this is an incredibly tight time frame. And on the size of the challenge, I've heard it stated by the United Nations and others that the net zero transformation is as significant a change as the Industrial Revolution, but to be achieved in a fraction of the time. Who would have thought that in a little over 8 years' time, it won't be possible to buy a car powered by petrol or diesel in the UK? And we'll feel the ramifications of this far, far earlier. Looking back 9 years, London was preparing to open the 2012 Olympics. Now that might be a sign of my age, but it seems like yesterday. So look, I know what I said sounds like, well, quite a heavy statement, particularly at the current time. And considering what we've been through, I also know it will take a lot for us to look up and beyond the current recovery. So please don't postpone those first steps any longer than you absolutely have to. And not postponing steps brings me back nicely to the title of our webinar, Getting to the Start Line of the Race to Zero. And to get you to the start line, we need to do three things. We need you here, check. We need to let you know that this is important. And the third thing, we need to put in place the information and support to help you consider what your response will be. Today, it's very much about awareness, it's about information, and it's about ongoing support. Now, you may have noted on the invitation or the registration page that today also marks the launch of a new industry report titled A Path to Net Zero Emissions, Decarbonising the Construction Supply Chain. So in addition to hearing from our industry experts, who I promise I will introduce presently, we've also produced a pretty solid guide for you. And what I hope is a really accessible, usable document, and not just another very wordy report that ends up in the drawer. The objective of the report, which really steered all our interactions about what to include and what to exclude, was to provide the information we think you'll need to get this topic on the board table for discussion. Now, whether that's later today or maybe tomorrow, that's fine, but this is really a document to grab the attention of your senior teams. So over the past 6 months, you could say we've done the research to get this topic onto your strategic priority list. And to be fair, this report has been put together with our clients working in the UK firmly in mind, firmly mind centre. But given the widespread social reprioritisation and action, I think this is equally applicable for all businesses operating in construction, whether that be domestic or international markets. And to summarise, we've broken this report not into 12 chapters, but into 3 sections. Section 1 identifies the 9 reasons for action, which is really about making the business case, the drivers of change we should all be aware of and continue to monitor. And you can see the 9 reasons there painted nice and clearly. So look, number 1, this is about the societal shift in priority. It's about us taking responsible action as individuals and businesses. We can't fail to have ignored that. Government policy and the importance of anticipating policy and not having to react to it. Third one, public procurement, not least the recent issue of the public policy notice, PPN 621, earlier this month by the UK government, which mandates that all suppliers to government over a 5 million threshold have to have a publicly disclosed net zero plan in place. Investor demand for ESG, environmental social governance. I'm hearing this acronym on a daily basis now, with the focus very much on the E and the rapidly growing impact from investors for sustainable capital projects. The 5th area, asset owners demand, the corporate clients of construction. From next year, all listed companies in the UK will have to report climate data to the TCFD standard. That's the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And we also look in the report at the water sector and the clients that are funding digital infrastructure like data centres. Number 6, the construction supply chain. This is a key driver, and we'll touch on this shortly in our conversation. The war for talent and a growing responsible business perspective. Number 8, industry leadership and momentum, fairly self-explanatory. A number of groups, organisations, both new and existing, really supporting industry in our move. And finally, the competitive advantage of moving to net zero. And what are the near-term financial cost savings and reputational benefits that are involved in progressing to net zero? That's the first section. And then in the second section of the report, we carve out the 9 steps that every net zero strategy should consider. And this has been done with the aim of providing a high-level glimpse of what your decarbonisation journey might entail. An idea of what's involved and the level of commitment that's required. There's a graphic that we've produced, and again, the 9 steps, I'll just talk them very briefly. So look, number 1, involve leadership at the outset of the journey, which is really what today is about, and signalling that long-term commitment that's required. Engaging your staff and the importance of giving all employees the opportunity to contribute and to add value. The measuring and benchmarking, the priority areas, the setting of targets, goals and timelines. Reducing emissions. This is the implementation stage of the plan. This is, as we might say, where the rubber hits the road. Innovate. Number 7. Where we've identified the difficult areas, where there's action that needs to be taken over a longer period of time, and the areas where collaboration will be necessary in sharing the cost, the time, the risk, where other companies in other sectors have similar challenges. That's where the innovation is coming and will come. And the final two, offsetting. We introduce the importance of investing in reduction measures first, and then considering what bona fide offsets there are. And then on the public stakeholder disclosure, this is, just an important consideration to tackle the greenwash and skepticism that's really kind of shrouded sustainability in the years previous. So the importance of being open, being credible, and accounting for carbon in an open and clear way. So there are a couple of technical areas there, but just to reiterate, this is by no means a technical document. It is a high-level view, but hopefully enough just to get you started and to give you a sense of what's down the line. The final section of the report starts with a summary of the wide array of financial and other supports provided by Enterprise Ireland and other industry sources. And you may have read that an additional 10 million euros of funding was announced by the Taoiseach back in April to support our Green Future support programs. Now, we'd like to get as much of that 10 million into the construction sector initiatives and plans as we possibly can. And so to today's agenda and a quick look at what you can expect over the next hour or so. That sounds like a Skylink, doesn't it? You may have already noticed from a quick look of the agenda that the agenda follows the report structure, whereby we'll begin with a panel conversation, which will be divided evenly on the why, the drivers for action, followed by a discussion on the how, the what it takes. We'll then conclude with a period for questions and answers. So please, if I can ask you, put your questions in the chat, and we'll cover off as many of those as we can. And finally, and hopefully preempting your appetite for change, my colleague Luke Newcomb, a co-author of the report, will run through the Enterprise Ireland financial supports, the training and consultancy that are available to help you progress your own requirements along the path to net zero. So hopefully we're keeping fairly close to time, which is another important responsibility that I will carry with pride today. But timekeeping is going to be important. So what I would say is that our research over these past 6-7 months has led to many fascinating meetings and conversations across the property and construction industry. And I'd say that the generosity, the passion and energy of those we've spoken to has been absolutely infectious. And I was absolutely delighted that 4 of those contributors were free to join us today. 4 leaders in this field with construction sector experience of starting, of building and sustaining the momentum of a carbon reduction strategy. So maybe if I can invite our panelists to turn their cameras on, keep me company. Here we go. Excellent. And so without further ado, and to explore the how and the why, let me introduce you to our first panel with Isabel, Joanne and Matt. And maybe in that order, starting with Isabel and concluding with Matt, I might ask each of you to introduce yourselves before we start exploring our first theme. Isabel.
Okay, sure. So I'm the responsible business director at Mace, which means I look after anything that is carbon, climate change, biodiversity, social value, corporately, so at group level, and also through all of our service offers, which we have 4 engines of activity. So we are a developer, a consultant, a constructor and a facilities manager. Big footprint across UK and Ireland, but also internationally further afield as well. I'll move on to Matt.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Kennedy. I'm the European Climate Services Leader for Arup. For those not familiar with Arup, they're an international engineering and design company. We've been in Ireland for 75 years, and I think 75 years and a week, we've been in the UK, so just slightly in the UK before Ireland, but ultimately we're a multinational that has a footprint of 16,000 staff across Europe, the Americas and Asia. My focus really is on providing carbon, climate, sustainable development services across the business, and that really takes the form of both mitigation or decarbonisation and resilience.
Thank you, Matt. And Joanne.
Hi there, I'm Joanne Garbutt. I'm the Director of Sustainability at Mercury, which is a global in that we're currently at the moment working in Europe mainly, but of course we also look at other things. We do construction, and my role in Mercury would be both helping to roll out and plan what we need to do in the sustainability space, which then includes the part around employee well-being and all the employee programs around it. There's the responsible partnership part, which includes the client relations and the supply chain. We look at the environmental path, which includes the water usage, the energy usage, all the way to carbon and all these other environmental aspects. And then also the local communities that we work in to make sure that we are engaging with them and we are supporting them as necessary at our local project sites.
Thank you. Okay, so look, let's crack on with our panel conversation. So first question for the panel, and I'm keen to get each of your perspectives. So Matt, maybe I could ask you to answer this one first, and then we'll work through. This one's a bit about what's been and what's to come. And as we know, that there's been a real acceleration of climate change action and initiatives in the past 2 years, which is perhaps counterintuitive. But what do you attribute to the evolution or emergence of this recent green wave? And then what key events, what tipping points in the future do you see that are going to start adding momentum, even more momentum to what we're experiencing today? So Matt, what do you think?
Okay, John. Yeah. So the first thing is there's been an acknowledgement that our resources are quite finite and that we have to develop new products, technology, services. So the first one is an acceptance that there is a climate change challenge. The second point then is it's about an understanding that we have a role to play in terms of mitigating the impact of these actions and enabling the right infrastructure to be able to deliver on these services. So from an Arup perspective, then once you accept that there's a challenge and you understand that you have a role to play, then before you can advise clients and services and actions, then you need to have credibility. So the actions that you are recommending or advising, you need to be doing them yourself in-house. So having your own pathway to net zero, embedding sustainability across your whole business. Then the next thing then is understanding that the challenges that exist are not just challenges for government. In fact, they're very clearly challenges for everyone, and the private sector and industry play a large role in terms of meeting those challenges. So that might mean leading and aligning reduction targets with the global challenges that governments are setting. Now, why has this happened? Why do you, coming to your point around the green wave, I think that there is a recognition of the importance of carbon, a carbon that can actually play an opportunity and a risk to people's businesses and the sustainability of their businesses. So if people do nothing, if industry does nothing, then there's a good chance that we will lead to stranded assets. So there's a large risk in terms of the business, the resilience of a business around those types of assets. But if we do something such as building retrofit, for an example, we provide lots of value within the economy, but value in terms of our products and services. And then it's about realizing that opportunity and that value. And the final point that I would say is that a lot of these actions are happening not just because of incentives in terms of stimulus, but they're happening because clients are demanding change. They're demanding more environmental commitments. you can see this in terms of government contracts, in terms of procurement. You can see it in terms of organizations reporting, verifying and validating their own emissions. And you can see it in the types of selection of projects. Companies are helping to select particular projects that have strong sustainability criteria and transitioning their business into those types of projects rather than the previous projects. So there's a multitude of different reasons why this wave is happening, but it is understanding that it presents both risks and opportunities to business.
Indeed. And Isabel, be really interested in your perspective over the last 2 years and what you see as perhaps some of the tipping points in the future that are only going to add momentum to the current green wave of activity.
Sure. I think I'll go a bit more human factor. So rather than just repeat what Matt said, everything he said, I agree with. But so for us, it's really important that we position as a leader in this space to make sure that we can attract and retain the best people. So I'll give you some headline stats. So sustainability has been the most searched for term on our website for 4 years now. And 50% of the people, we obviously have all the analytics behind who's having a little look at what we're doing. And 50% of those people are incoming staff who are looking at our careers pages and then looking to see what we do as business. 50% are clients. So we've known for some years that this is of great appeal. In terms of today now, this last year, since we launched our net zero carbon strategy, which was about 18 months ago, we became net zero carbon last year. We've seen some of the search functions for carbon net zero similarly increase, and I think this year we've seen an 80% increase in terms of hits and client inquiries coming in as to how we can help them. So there's the human quality in terms of the individual is super keen to be part of the change, but then there's also the very real commercial validity of moving in this direction, as Matt's already explained, whether it's government, banking, big infra, all of those clients are very, very keen to do more. So we need to know what good looks like.
Thank you. And Anne.
I agree with both the previous two speakers. If I look at what happens every day in our lives, whether we're working from home or working from the office, from a news perspective, we are seeing more client-driven news items. So it is definitely more and more in our own awareness. People are asking themselves questions around how they can impact this themselves. And as a company, of course, we have heard already from Matt and so forth that it comes from the client side, and from Isabel, it also comes from the new employees that are looking to work for us. They are very enthusiastic about this space. But what I also see is end of this year, we'll have the next climate conference happening in Glasgow. And it was supposed to happen last year, it got moved to this year. And that's definitely going to be a moment of reckoning, because none of the countries are really on track with the net zero targets or the reduction targets that's been agreed to before in 2015 in Paris. So that's definitely going to only speed up us having more news items around that. And of course, after that, there'll probably be some new agreements made which will impact what we do next. And next to that, right next to that, the other thing that's true is in the last 2 years, even China has signed up to net zero by 2050. So by now we have over 65% of the world's emissions, the countries behind them signed up to a net zero target. So that momentum is gathering on a much broader scale than, just the company you're working for, the clients you have. And that will, of course, drive legislation and all the agreements that's been made on a country scale when you see these large events happening outside of just one company or one country. So I think that's also going to focus us more in this area, and it's probably going to lead to more legislation and more agreements that needs to be executed over the next few years. So I think that also will definitely accelerate and impact what we do next.
100% agree. The United Nations COP summits have been so instrumental in driving activity. And we look back to 2015 and Paris, and that is commonly referred to as one of the big global international drivers of this change. And like I say, China and the US as well coming back into this play. the formative stage of their markets and the opportunities that exist for companies to help other markets, not just the two largest economies in the world. In addition to all this government action that we're seeing and feeling, yeah, no, I agree that there will be points that we can point to very clearly in the next 6-12 months that are going to generate more momentum in this green wave of opportunity and action. And yeah, and goodness knows what's next. What's beyond that? Sorry, Matthew.
You know, I was just going to say one thing about Paris as well, and certainly the UNFCCC it's an area that I'm familiar with. What was really a tipping point for Paris, not only because collective agreement from governments, but it was nearly the first opportunity where business engaged. So if you think of UNFCCC all the way back to the Rio declarations, there wasn't a large role outside of government. There wasn't a large role for industry who could collectively form coalitions and say, actually, we're the ones who are going to promote this change now. We're the ones who want more climate endeavour, more decarbonisation. So you can see certainly since, and really Paris, while it was a tipping point in 2015, it's only beginning to be implemented since this year, last year. And in fact, so we would be providing the sustainability consultancy for the COP agreement, the next meeting in Glasgow. And that will set the frame about how you can measure and account for emissions. So the challenging part of Paris remains to get agreement around the accounting mechanisms that the countries are going to set up to. But ultimately, what we've seen in the last 5 years is a much more invigorated business sector that is coming together with industry to promote that type of change. Now, it does help when you have larger economies making declarations, including, as Joanne said, China, all the way from Japan back over to the US. And the European Union has been, in many ways, the leader in terms of setting that type of objective. But there are bits that we're missing within things like Paris around nature-based solutions, around the nature-based actions, and those now are being integrated within the Paris Agreement in Glasgow. So it's really exciting to see industry and the role that they would play in enabling that change, and not just something that is an agreement from at a government level.
Thank you. And if I might just shape the conversation more, or perhaps less about the environment and more about sort of the organisations with the next question. And Isabel, I might come to you first on this one, and Joanna, I'll come to you first on the next one. But Isabel, to the panel, you know, look for all your perspectives on this. But in each of your organisations, you've taken leadership positions, and you've forged ahead as individuals and as businesses with your carbon reduction plans and actions. So how important will it be for your project supply chains and partners to align with carbon reduction programs? And this is give a sense of the speed of change that you're experiencing.
Yes. And so it's extremely important. So we have 3 headline environmental corporate KPIs, which we've launched this year with our new business strategy, which is, or which are rather, 500 hectares of biodiversity net gain. We are not a landowner, so we deliver that through our partners and clients. Lots of tree planting, pocket park creation, that sort of thing. We've done a lot of that in the past, but we've scaled it up. So our last target was 100 hectares, last business plan period. This is now 500 hectares. We have one for our corporate carbon footprint. So as I said, we're a net zero carbon business. We're maintaining that status necessarily through offset, which we think is the right thing to do, gold standard offsets versus kind of incremental improvements. We're at a position where we can't do that much more. We need a lot of diesel. We have business travel. Those things are very difficult to make happen without carbon emissions. So we have a 10% improvement on our corporate carbon footprint. And then the third piece, the biggest of the 3 targets, is 1 million tonnes of client carbon savings. So obviously we are an enabler of client activity and client projects and programs. So that's where the sort of biggest area of focus is. To put it in perspective, our corporate footprint, if we ignore 2020, because it was a bit weird, no one was moving around, etc. 2019, it was about 25,000 tons of carbon. That did include some of our scope 3, so we do include business travel, we do include site use of diesel, which isn't ours, it's our supply chain diesel. So to get back to your point about supply chain, incredibly important that we mobilise and engage, support all of our suppliers. The bigger footprint for us is our construction supply chain directly versus the partners that we work with, design community, etc. So we have what is called the Mace Business School, which is a membership organisation for our top 50 up to sometimes top 60, 70 suppliers. Anyone who's in the business school as a member benefits from a whole bunch of training and development and knowledge share and the like. But it's also a requirement that the partners in that business school align with all of our corporate strategies. Now, that can be the more classic areas of health and safety, for example, obviously quality delivery and the like. But more recently, all of those members have signed up to having a net zero carbon strategy in place by end of 22. We survey them every few months, and at the moment, something like 55% of that top 50 membership have now created their own strategies and have published it. We don't require them to be delivering net zero from end of 22 because some of our partners have got phenomenal footprints. If your game is concrete, there's an awful lot of carbon in that. It's difficult to get to zero overnight. So it's extremely important, and we host regular webinars on the big topics. This year we focused on air quality, which again links nicely to diesel. Most of what we deliver is urban, so air quality is particularly important. We've done a couple of sessions on carbon, both embodied carbon but also emissions-based carbon. We've done social value creation, and the next one we'll be doing with biodiversity. So really important to maintain those relationships, not least because, quite frankly, most of the best ideas and the technical innovation comes from our supply chain partners. So quite a long response there, but I hope complete.
No, wonderfully comprehensive. Wonderfully. And Joanne, coming back to Mercury.
Well, most of what Isabel said is also the approach and the impact that we have from a Mercury side in engaging on those various aspects that you mentioned. Something I can add to it is Mercury is one of the companies, in fact, the first general contractor in Europe that's busy working on an open source program to calculate carbon. And as such, we are helping clients to calculate what is the embodied carbon in a built project or one that is being planned. And this is where you really see that supply chain piece coming to the fore, because a big part of what goes into a construction project would be, as Isabel said, is the concrete and the steel. But there's also, you can extend that to the electrical equipment, the mechanical equipment, etc. All of that has been made with, and when it comes to site, it already has an embodied carbon footprint based on where it came from. And since that comes from our supply chain, it really is important for us to keep in a close contact with them. And like Isabel, we also have surveyed our supply chain to understand where they are on their sustainability journeys. And we are engaging with them. The ones that have the environmental disclosure, product disclosures available, we're trying to get those to put that into this open source tool as we help others like Skanska's involved, Microsoft's involved, and so forth, to really expand on its ability to be useful in the space. And the other part that's also very true is our clients, and there's the CIF document that was published in the last month or so called Green Procurement. And in there also you see there's a definite move towards more of a discussion around responsible environmental principles in bid leveling than only looking at commercials. Yeah. So from a client perspective and of being competitively advantaged in the future, we have to engage with our supply chain. And if we're all serious about carbon and if we're measuring it and calculating it, we can't get there without the supply chains.
I think one of the things that came out very, very clearly in the research that we carried out was that if you're a contracting business, 90% of your emissions can be contained and more in your supply chains. And so once you've tackled the emissions that are directly under your control, that becomes the next big challenge. And measuring and the quantification and comparability and certainty are obviously key. And I've heard it said, and apologies if you've heard this a million times before, but is it carbon is the new calorie? You know, we're everything. You know, we'll need
I have not heard that before.
Oh, have you? Oh, fantastic! First, you heard it here. So yeah, very good. And Matt, how are you seeing this impact your partners and supply chain in terms of selection? Who you work with, who you don't?
Yeah, so I certainly would agree with what Isabel and Joe said around the attempts to reduce operational carbon, and now we're more focused on reducing embodied carbon. And really in the building sector, that's about repurposing or prioritizing reusing existing buildings and materials. I think we're seeing a lot more focus on circularity as a principle and a practice, certainly in this sector, the promotion of more efficiencies and deployment of more renewable power. But from certainly my perspective, organizations and clients are beginning to look at the different scopes, with their own power being nearly one of the easiest ones to tackle. But when they go to the third scope, and often people refer to it as the value or the supply chain, that's really when you question the credibility of the target. Because really, looking at an organization's targets, they really need to be backed up with plans to reduce their value chain emissions. And that's challenging. It can be challenging for really sectors such as the steel sector, the cement sector, that have challenges around their supply chain, especially from the amount of carbon. But the approach that certainly I would be promoting is working with the suppliers to address the emissions, engaging with them in terms of best practice. And that could, as was referenced in terms of environmental product declarations, it could be about revisiting product design choices. It can be looking really at setting different types of procurement standards, working together on sectoral targets. Certainly we see it a lot in Ireland, whereby an organization, say a manufacturing organization, the accessibility and how they transit and how they work with their transit companies and haulage companies, it might just be by truck. How do you actually measure and monitor the impact? You need to really work with your suppliers in terms of reducing their, working together to reduce the emissions. And this is a challenging component in terms of logistics and materials and transportation of those materials around the country, in absence of rail options being available. So ultimately, it's about setting clear targets to help enable collectively emissions reductions, especially in those hard to abate areas.
And everything that we've just spoken about has incurred and will incur some time and some cost and some training and doing something different. And Isabel, some of the measures, from 100 to, was it 500,000 hectares?
500 hectares, a million tons.
500 hectares,
Yeah.
a million tons. Thank you. Sorry.
It's all right. It's literally tattooed on my wrist. It doesn't need to be tattooed on yours. Yeah.
I don't want to misquote you for fear of that getting out there. But with any investment decision that you're making, and I guess we all acknowledge that when you invest, the benefits don't always align with the costs at the point you hand over the money. So there is an understanding that what we're doing is not an immediate payback, but what are the benefits that you'd point to? And I think you touched on this, Isabel, as well, in terms of just what we've called in the report the war on talent, or the war for talent, but getting people into your business, enable it to grow. But Joanne, maybe just again to start with you, what would you point to? What benefits would your company point to as you've progressed along the journey to net zero already? So is there anything in the immediate term you go, actually this is helping us, and actually this is, we're going the right way? We recognise there's a benefit beyond the short term, but how are you justifying that investment return kind of conversation? Are you feeling it?
I think your question is correct in assuming that evaluating benefits has got to be a long-term perspective. You can have some benefits in the short term, but most of it is going to be long-term over time. So when we look at those strategically speaking, again, if I tie into what Isabel had said before on the war for talent, etc., we too find that a lot of people that are attracted to us are looking for that environmentally responsible business employer. And so that definitely does help us to attract people to us. They do see us succeed in many areas, and they see us being responsible as a business, and that is attractive to them. So that definitely is a short-term benefit. It lowers your recruitment costs in a near term when you are able to attract people without having to spend too much on agencies, etc. It's also true that as you engage with your supply chain, you do get more of a competitive advantage. I mentioned that the bid leveling decisions being a lot more being transgressing or moving over into also having that concern for, are you able to show yourself to be an environmentally responsible business partner to your client? So there is a competitive advantage there as well. You have a lot of repeat business, and we have a very high percentage of repeat business, and I think that is definitely a part of it. We can also look at operational costs. As you start to look at your buildings, for example, that you're starting to be more energy efficient, and you're starting to look at your lighting, your heating, and these kind of, and the way that you use your buildings when you are turning things on and off, and automation versus human choice, etc. There's definitely a almost immediate saving there in operational costs if you look at it. And then, of course, reputationally, there is a benefit, because being in that space towards net zero targets, working with your supply chain and your clients and your local communities that I mentioned before, you do build up a reputation as a company that can be relied on in the space. And that definitely adds to reputational benefits.
Very good. So cost savings, reputational benefits, getting closer to your clients, getting closer to your supply chain. Matt, is that something you reflect in the consultancy side?
Yes, I think reputational benefits are hugely important. I think why we have applied a net zero strategy is really about us trying to influence evolving public policy, trying to show some leadership. That is in many ways about preserving ecological stability and having a defensible approach in terms of the work we're doing. So sometimes that is way beyond carbon. That could be about social value. It could be about improving air quality, improving health and living, and more vibrant economies. Now, you know, and more vibrant societies. So really, there's a much. This comes back to the talent, attracting the individuals that sign up to those type of values become really important, because that's really what we're in the business of, is that type of ecological stability. Now you're seeing a low carbon, zero carbon world eventually, but ultimately we need to provide leadership in terms of we can gain a competitive advantage, we can inform government policy, but all of these things are the enablers, in many ways, the enabling environment to achieve this net zero goals. So often a large focus is on the carbon, but moving away to the wider social, economic, ecological benefits. And that's how we would not only attract talent to work with us, but also work very closely with clients in terms of who want to go on a pathway similar to ourselves.
Very good. And Isabel, across the Mace group.
I don't know if I'd add much more.
You're investing big, yeah. So,
yeah. So I think the outcomes that we're generating and the positioning in terms of whether it's website clicks or other, the investment costs that have gone in to generate those outcomes are quite modest actually. So in terms of the sort of wider R&D piece, so Mace tries to all the time be innovating and moving forward and trialing new technologies and systems and the like. The sustainability and low carbon solutions tend to be cost neutral. So either because, so for example, if you move away from a diesel generator to an alternative, they absolutely pay for themselves. So I mean, not on day one, but usually a few weeks into the process. And obviously most of our sites are running equipment for long periods of time. Certainly when you look at the wider benefits, so for example, we get really great feedback from operators of the equipment. They like working in a quiet cab that's not full of emissions, so they feel happier about their job, so maybe they'd come to one of our sites versus somewhere else. We don't measure or try to quantify that, but let's hope that's a soft benefit. On embodied carbon, a huge amount of the wins that we've had have been through revisiting designs. So designs that are overcooked, perhaps a little bit cut and paste from the last project, where things don't reflect best practice and optimum engineering. Mm-hmm. So whether it's substructure, superstructure, facades. So again, often in that scenario where you are reducing the amount of material in your product, then clearly there are some commercial savings to be had. Ultimately, you might need to spend more on design, or you might need to spend more on a particular product where there's less carbon, but the product is delivering the same outcome. But I would say the investment costs are acceptable. Now, I don't own Mace, so I can't speak on behalf of the owners of Mace, but I mean, they seem happy with what we're doing. So yeah.
Very good. So I like that use less, waste less, pollute less kind of journey.
Yeah, it's old school resource efficiency principles, but being scaled up.
Yeah, no, very good. I might just take the opportunity now to introduce the second theme of this morning's net zero conversation. So after offering some clarity on the reasons you may wish to act, the second session, hopefully we're going to give you an account of what you might be about to embark on. But certainly what you're committing to, I suppose, is a series of plans, of goals and actions that will run beyond the traditional business cycle. And I think it would be really useful to kind of set the scene of what it takes, and maybe to get us started on our final panel conversation, our second panel conversation, is to introduce our fourth panelist, Shay McGann. So Shay, there we go, we're now complete. Shay heads up ESG at Clearstream Solutions, which is a low carbon consultancy, and is their sustainability strategy and reporting manager. I can tell you that Shay brings experience of decarbonisation strategies from a number of sectors, and with experience of working across companies of all sizes. So Shay, you're very welcome. Good to see you. And it'd be great if you might share some insights with us, as that's okay. You good? Oh yeah,
hi, John.
My mic is on.
Sorry, muted there.
It's great. As you know, Shay, you've helped us with this report, particularly around some of the technical or our technical understanding, and we identified those 9 features or steps I mentioned earlier in a journey to net zero construction for the construction supply chain. So as an organization, there's an awful thing. So as an organization embarks at the very outset of this journey to net zero, could you give us a feel for some of the key questions that management teams ask you, or that should be asking themselves? So what advice do you give to companies with no experience of benchmarking, who don't know where to start? So a big question. But what's it been like these few years working with companies on this initial piece?
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, we work with clients across all sectors, but we're increasingly working with clients in the construction sector as I suppose they start and build on their climate strategies, of which I suppose net zero is a part. Until relatively recently, I suppose, conducting a carbon footprint has been an activity of larger corporates. However, this is really changing, as we've heard from your last panel. And the net zero commitments and targets are really shifting, I suppose, the activity of doing a carbon footprint from being like a backward-looking activity to a forward-looking. And this is quite a fundamental, I suppose, change. And particularly for a sector that will have a real challenge, I think, in reducing its product emissions or its embodied carbon. From the work we've been doing, we see there being 4 main questions that management teams should be asking themselves. The first is what is your level of ambition? We kind of work with companies through a climate ambition roadmap, and this really helps them to understand what they need to do to be compliant, and then how they can develop to be more mature before then moving into a leadership position on climate. What we're seeing is companies increasingly want to be in this leadership space, as they're really seeing climate as a competitive advantage, and it's something that their customers and other stakeholder groups are really asking for. It's also worth noting that this space is developing at a really fast pace. So what might be ambitious today may not be in 12 months' time or in 18 months' time. And companies may be making this commitment without being 100% sure of how they're going to get there. And this is quite an uncomfortable space, I think, for some companies to be in. It kind of requires a real change in mindset. But I think it's good for companies in your audience on the call today to understand that, like, a lot of the technologies are already available. So yeah, don't be too scared, I suppose, of making that commitment. The second question then is, how do we actually do it? How do you measure your carbon footprint and set your baseline? So there are lots of frameworks out there to help companies measure their footprint, like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Companies can do this for themselves, but they often tend to work with a carbon specialist or a consulting firm like ourselves to at least get them started, and then kind of going forward they can look at tools and all the things that go with that. It's good to know that companies don't have to set their best baseline in the previous year. If the data is available, like, we can go back and do it for a kind of a previous 2018 or 2019, depending on the client and their footprint. And another thing for management teams to kind of, I suppose, consider is the scope of their footprint. Will you just look at your direct emissions, so what you actually your emissions generated on site, so scope 1 and scope 2, or as Matt was talking about, will you actually consider your kind of scope 3 emissions, or your full value chain emissions? So scope 3 is when you kind of look up your supply chain, so upstream to your materials, and then downstream to the sale of your product and end of life, and considering the emissions generated there. Then the third question is, what supports will kind of management teams need to put in place to make sure they meet this target? So things like good governance, interim targets, and external reporting frameworks. From a governance perspective, the response to net zero will need to include people from right across your organization. If it's just one person or one department, this will more than likely not be achieved. It really needs to be embedded into the culture, and everyone in the business needs to think about how they can make their job role more sustainable. Interim targets must be set, or really, we would really encourage our clients to set them. If they don't set these, there's the obvious consequence of not meeting their commitment. But I think there's also a risk that it will be seen as greenwashing. Like, your stakeholders know that you probably won't be around, or at least you may not be in your role in 2050. So I think they'll see this as kind of passing the buck. Oh, the next person will deal with it. We have another 30 years to deal with this. And then from a setting an interim targets perspective, we generally recommend to look at frameworks. So the Science Based Target initiative is one that a lot of companies are signing up to help them keep on track. And this generally means companies will need to reduce their emissions by about 7% per year. And then the final question is, companies really need to consider how they're going to communicate this to their stakeholders. It can be a really confusing and busy space, so try to keep it simple. Recognize you have multiple stakeholder groups. Then select metrics and KPIs that will not only drive change within your business, but are easy to understand. Transparency is really key here. Plan where you'll report this information. Is this part of a wider sustainability strategy you have in your company? I suppose places where people currently report this information is annual report, sustainability report, or for maybe smaller companies, it might just be on your website. And then finally, just another avenue to consider is you may find it easier to actually respond to like an environmental disclosure platform, say like CDP. CDP scores companies on their environmental performance, and it includes lots of other frameworks, say like TCFD. By doing CDP, you'll automatically look at the physical and transitional risks that you referred to, John, at the start. And it also is an easier way then for stakeholders to actually understand how you're getting on. You'll just need to check a company's score instead of having to read their detailed report. So, and yeah, we work with a lot of companies on both doing a footprint and on completing their CDP response. So I hope that gives you the audience, I suppose, a bit of a insight into the questions we're at.
And a question that we've been asked a few times actually, and it's a new question for us, which is about timing. Is there a good time or a bad time to start out? Or reporting or disclosing, or what's what kind of, how do you answer that type of question?
I think there's a really short answer to that question. There's only 9 years to 2030, which is kind of, I suppose, that interim goal that a lot of companies are working for. We need to have reduced our emissions by at least 50% by then. So at least get on this journey. You need to figure out what makes sense to each company. Will be individual, and you'll need to figure out what makes sense from a benchmarking perspective. But at least get started on the process now. Again, referring to some of the comments that came up in the previous panel, the culture change is a big element, and that will take a bit of time. So get started and involve your wider organisation.
Thank you, Jen. And I might open that question up to the rest of the panel on the if they can recall the kind of discussions that maybe you've had around timing. So maybe less contentious about when to start measuring your emissions, but I guess some variability is in terms of when we start disclosing. So if 2020 was a very low year for emissions, we've had conversations from clients of construction who said, well, look, next year's pipeline looks different to this year. This year's very, very busy. Maybe the graph will look better if we go back up rather than seeing it go up for the first 2 years, which might be obviously in terms of how it might look going up the first 2 years, despite lots of effort, it might be demotivating for people involved. So there is a little bit of social science about when, but I absolutely take your point, Shay, that we haven't got much time left. So people understand the industry trends and what's been happening. But just maybe extend that out to the panel. Would anyone like to contribute any of their experience or discussion, either themselves or with the supply chain?
I'm happy to go on that one. I think full disclosure is just get on with it. So, and if you're using carbon intensity metrics versus absolute carbon, i.e. how much carbon is in your business relative to every €1,000,000 or whatever your metric of business activity is, then you shouldn't see crazy dramatic increases. So, and I think a big part of what gives you integrity is to share your failings as much as your successes. So it's okay if your numbers go up, but you've done everything in your power to try to get things in the right place. I think that's okay. I think you've done what you could. So a case in point for us is always certain of our projects, the client has not been able to secure power supplies. The ones that are not the ones in city centres, but the ones that are remote. So typically that would be data centres. The client can't always negotiate in a timely way to get the power supply to that site, and we are then inevitably staring a load of diesel in the face because there's not yet sufficiently scalable equipment. I'm trying to use my words carefully. There's lots of technology that's really exciting. There are lots of diesel alternatives. They tend to be quite moderate. So if you're building something big, if you're digging big holes, again, there is no diesel alternative above about 20 tons if you're doing any sort of excavation. So in terms of equipment size. So inevitably we find ourselves in, I'll say, non-optimal circumstances on occasion, but I think that's okay. You share it, you explain why. I think what isn't okay is if you don't know why. So if you've just not been tracking and controlling and motivating and incentivizing your teams to do what is best, then that's not okay. If you just end up at the end of the year and go, oh, we're 50% higher than we were expecting. So, and I do think a big part of sharing the fails is as much how the industry will evolve and learn together as it is about only celebrating and crowing about what went brilliantly.
Absolutely.
So I know that not every company feels comfortable doing that, but absolutely that's been what we've tried to do at Mace.
Looking beyond the line graph, and as you say, what's genuinely happening in the context of the industry, and I suppose, Joanne, Matt, anything to add to that starting piece?
Just from my side, like I would traditionally come from the energy sector, so we've always been told about the cost of delay. So if you put something off, the price point is different. If you're thinking of major infrastructure, and now couple that with changing prices of carbon, infrastructure lock-in, and then the life cycle about how you can transition away from particular infrastructure into more cleaner ones, there's a huge cost associated with pushing the delay to down the road, that the company, it will bring significant risk to the company. What I would say is, in terms of what a company does first, all companies are at different levels of development and different levels of understanding. And if they get to the point of trying to decide when to disclose, then they're a lot of the way down the pathway to having the final answer. Often what I'm experiencing is that they have an appetite for change. They have a staff that are looking to change. They will require some change management practices around, their travel patterns of staff, the management of waste inside buildings, and all these different kind of dimensions that we need to think about beyond the powering of the buildings. But ultimately, we often work with them on things like an opportunities assessment to see, well, where do you feel the opportunities are for your business in terms of this, in terms of change? And coming back to maybe a little bit what Shay said, is that what's the ambition? What's your ambition around carbon? Or what's your ambition around sustainability? Is it that you want to reduce it at all costs? Is it you want to reduce it up to a particular cost where it makes economic sense? Is it that you just want to have more responsible business in terms of product declarations and something that you can talk to your market about in terms of responsible business? But nearly the first thing is understanding your data around your emissions. Working with the senior people in the organizations to understand where they want the business to go. And in many ways, the academics would describe it as an outcomes-driven approach.
Yeah.
Like, where do you see the organization in 5 years or 10 years? Maybe not in 2050, but the market will have changed. Where do you see your opportunities, or what segments in the market do you want to fill with this endeavor? And then it's about, once you have the data in place and understanding it, what is the appropriate baseline? And then you can, like what we would often do is help them to develop the opportunities assessment, help them to develop a framework or a strategy around actions and an implementation plan that has concrete, measurable actions that can deliver on multiple benefits, not just carbon, but beyond that, greener infrastructure benefits, cleaner air benefits, healthier, sustainable transport benefits. But you're quantifying that as part of an implementation plan, and then you'll get to disclose and measure and report on the achievements. But it is like, I don't want to, there is a particular steps to go through with every business. But unfortunately, every business isn't the same. Their appetite isn't, their knowledge around the area isn't the same. So you nearly need to engage with them in terms of understanding what their own appetite is, and then putting a plan in place that's suitable to them.
Absolutely. No, so I completely take that on board. So to summarize that, obviously that ambition, that desire, the why, how strong is it? Understanding your path, the data, how it's done, and then to Isabel's point, being very open about it, and just we haven't got much time. Be open and explain the path as well. But no, I think that's a really rounded piece of advice. Thank you. To talk a little bit about the people piece, if we may. So ultimately, this is a transformational change program on a societal scale, but it's also a transformational change program at business level and individual level. And ultimately, with any change program, people are right at the heart of this. But could you maybe just share how your organizations have engaged and reinforced the right behaviors and actions across your employees? And maybe does this feel, and I know, Joanne, you've done a number of change management programs over a number of different areas. Does this in any way feel different from other change programs? And Joanne, maybe you could lead us off with that.
Well, the main difference that you can right away see when you started the initiative around sustainability or the environmental benefits and programs, the waste, the water, the energy efficiencies, the carbon, all of this, is that your stakeholders are actually much more enthusiastic than they would be for any other change you've ever tried to do. You need to spend less time to explain to them the opportunities that would be missed if we don't go on this path now. And you spend less time trying to convince them of the risks involved with not taking action now. So setting the business case and trying to get the stakeholders on board is the fastest that I've seen with any initiative. So that is a positive, definitely. What I do see, though, on the other side is there's a lot of things in the media, facts, fake facts, as some people would call them, on social media, and a lot of people in the vacuum of being educated on the true facts, people have latched on to things that may not necessarily be the full truth or only half the truth. And so part of the initial phase is really not trying to get them on board as much, but to get the right facts on the table. People chase after things that may not necessarily get us to the big picture targets, such as net zero. It distracts a little bit. And so you do need to spend a little more time getting people all on the same page with, great, we're going down this path. What are the facts? What are we targeting and how are we measuring it? And how does it all tie together? So that is taking a little more time based on the fact that people have been reading things that are not necessarily science-based. Sure. But the buy-in of stakeholders is definitely much faster.
And Isabel, you gave us some lovely data points earlier on in the discussion about how Mace people are engaging in this. But I guess you've had to meet them halfway. How are you keeping people engaged and reinforcing the right behaviours and actions across your employees?
So we've got very different approaches depending on who you are. So one of the really successful programs we've run this year is what we've called low carbon leadership training. So that is for people at a senior level who don't need to know about how a heat pump works, for example. They need to understand investors, where's the money going, client interests. They need to understand the language, but at a high level. So I myself am no longer a technical expert. Some of the folk on the call here with that question would beat me in an exam on carbon. So, but I do need to be able to communicate with a whole range of government stakeholders, clients, investors, etc., all the time. And that's that sort of high senior level of colleague. We've given them very different type of leadership coaching and engagement versus perhaps if you are a project manager in a construction site capacity. You do absolutely need to know about design interfaces, understand the challenges of if you're going to buy something differently, or if your design team is looking to go down a path that we haven't delivered before, what do we need to be particularly mindful of, etc. So we've tried to tailor some of the training and engagement programs, and they've been really popular. Actually, just after this one, I've got another session. I think there's 400 people dialed in, so we get a lot of engagement. So, but it's just as Joanne said, this is a really popular topic. So for now, I'm gonna go with it while it's still up there in terms of popularity. We also necessarily need to measure and encourage outcomes. So we've got lots of dashboard reporting, which runs by business unit level, by delivery function. So I mentioned we have a development business, construction, consult, and operate. Each of those has very clear metrics and expectations in terms of what it is that they must deliver against our corporate targets. And that reporting runs monthly-ish, occasionally slightly less often than that if we've got data flow issues. So we've got friendly engagement, happiness factor. Let's all join in and be part of this. And then we've also got some stick, which is there's some metrics. Have you met them? So yeah, it's a reasonably okay blend. I think it's probably not perfect.
Very good. And Shay, how are you keeping or keeping employees engaged in the program? What's the advice? I guess or what are you seeing? What works and what's working less well?
It's interesting. It's an area that's, like, I think probably since COVID has just become nearly number one on our agenda. Sometimes it was the environmental and the carbon, and now it's like, how do we engage our employees? And we're working with a number of companies on various programs. Something I think we see is it, and I think it's number 2 on your steps list is to engage your staff. And the benefits of doing that is, I think for maybe some of your smaller companies on the call today that may have a problem resourcing some of this, is that it is such a topic that makes people, I don't know, that really want to get involved and they're passionate about it. So regardless of their job role, they may want to get involved, and they may be a real ally to your business. It may be the guy in IT who you never even considered asking, but he's super passionate about this. And so, yeah, engage with all of your stakeholders early and ask them all, do they want to be involved? Most won't, but you just may get a gem that may really help you run your program and deliver something really meaningful. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. And Matt, the last word on employee engagement.
Yeah,
what's working?
It's critical. And I would answer it in 2 ways. There's the way that is mainstream staff, where we've identified sustainability champions to drive actions across the business, identify training for people, and obviously work with quality teams to roll out travel surveys, asking the questions around the choice of travel, whether you need to travel at all, and reinforcing that everyone's actions are important, so as kind of standard sustainability champions within a business. But then there's the more mundane stuff around making this business as usual. So who needs to be involved in a net zero committee within a business? And often it's people around facilities, people around procurement, people around finance, the people who hold the purse strings in many instances, where you're asking them to make the changes in terms of procurement, working with your suppliers and your supply chain, identifying who not only our larger clients are and working with them to reduce their emissions, but across your whole value chain. And that's more at a corporate approach, I guess, and that's the less shiny view of sustainability, but that's really the more view around, well, this is how we implement the change. This is how we have a carbon budget per individual, and how we track and monitor. meeting the objectives there is done through the sustainability champions, but ultimately at a more central level, the people who are responsible for procurement and facilities and finance, and those are the people who we also want to clearly engage as employees, as leaders within their particular disciplines. So it's a kind of at least a two-stage approach without even talking about stakeholders.
Sure, and that whole change management is just, it touches on everybody in every role and across the organisation, up, down, and the opportunity for everyone to add value is obviously a key piece that I've taken from that. So thank you very much. We're going to transition. That's a kind of word of the day, isn't it? We're going to transition now into the question and answers section. So hold your seats. So there you go. If you didn't know, that's what we're about to do. Luke, I think we could probably lose that slide. But now we know we've transitioned. Thank you. So we have 4 or 5 minutes for some Q&A, and we've got there's some good questions that cropped up in the chat. Looking at this one here about the elephant in the room is concrete. How can we address this, and is buying carbon credits, could that be perceived as greenwashing? So concrete.
You want me to take that one? I'll take that one.
Thank you.
So concrete, there are ways. So we're all going to carry on using concrete. So I am a super fan interested of, can we build things out of crazy new innovative materials like bamboo or whatever is kind of under investigation. All brilliant. However, ultimately we're using a lot of concrete and steel, masonry, etc. for the foreseeable. So we need to fix concrete in particular. The first thing that we can do is substantively use less. As I mentioned before, we did a really extended piece of work last year looking at all the concrete in all of our projects, and typically they're overspec'd by up to 15%, as I mentioned before. So that's a kind of, there's a whole bunch of reasons why that is that I won't go into at the moment, but it's just industry. That is what the industry does. It overspecifies things. So we've been looking to reduce how much we use, number one. Number two, cement replacements are very, very viable. There's sometimes some unhelpful naysayer contributions, which are that, oh, we've got a finite supply of pulverized fuel ash and GGBS. There's absolutely loads of it. We can worry about when it's run out in quite a few years from now. So the next thing is to address the amount of steel going into the concrete, so the rebar, and to use low carbon steel products. So we've got a really interesting, so the biggest challenge in using cement replacements is that it's very difficult to secure insurance. So if your product is not aligned with insurance and British standard certifications, then not every insurer and not every client consequently is very comfortable to go down that path. So there's quite a few of the big concrete contractors and the tier ones like Mace who are doing really pretty extensive R&D in that space at the moment. We've got a very interesting product, which is a low carbon concrete cassette. So it's off-site manufactured, cement replacements, low carbon steel, much less steel in it, cured slowly off-site. So there is a need to move into that off-site space rather than in situ pours. And that product is currently being tested. So it's been manufactured and it's being tested to meet all of those British standards by, I think it's University College London and another of the testing institutes. So fingers crossed, it's all looking fantastic. It's not going to break in half the moment someone walks on it, etc. That has 75% less carbon in it than a regular concrete floor slab. So there are, and it at no cost premium. Important, no cost premium. So the cement replacement is slightly more expensive than cement, but you're using a lot less product. So there are really obvious solutions out there, and I said a number of the concrete partners in the market are doing really interesting work in that space. On the carbon credits, I'm not quite sure what that is asking. Possibly, if you, sorry, person who asked the question, do let me know if this isn't answering. In terms of offset, we are offsetting everything after we've done what we can in everything we do. So if you look at our published report, it's Steps Without Footprints. 1 year on, we shared everything that we're doing in that space. We decided we wanted to get to zero with offsets because we want to get to zero. So it's not negating any of the work we're doing on efficiency, on 100% renewable power procurement, which we've been doing for many years, on not using diesel, etc. I do think offsets are really important, because if without offsets, we're going to be making incremental improvements year on year, and still generating loads of carbon. Doesn't really matter if it's 10% better or 20% better if you're still producing a shed load of carbon. So all of the offsets are regulated through what's called the gold standards route, which has been around for about 20 years. So that is a pretty safe route by which to then take all of that carbon that you've generated out of the atmosphere. So it's through really established routes like tree planting, etc.
Isabel, thank you. That was a really comprehensive answer to that one. I think we've got time for one more.
Sorry, that was long, but
oh, no.
anyone else can talk about concrete too.
Good question, good answer. I've got one here. So I suppose a behavioural piece. And is there a risk that clients and consultants will try to place a disproportionate amount of the responsibility onto the supply chain? Now, we've heard a lot about collaboration and getting closer to the supply chain, but would anyone like to volunteer a response to the behaviour aspects of a new requirement, I suppose, that
I'll jump on that one. I think it's, from our perspective, we're targeting to be have responsible partnerships, and that partnership means we're not doing it to you, we're doing it with you. So whereas we have access and we're growing our skills in the area of this carbon calculator tool, we definitely want to partner with our supply chain. And as we know, in Europe, there is a few tier 1 suppliers, but there's also a few mom and pop shops. And ultimately, for the far outreaches where some of our clients want us to be able to deliver, you're going to have a mix of a supply chain. And not everyone can afford to go that way just, off the bat. So I think it's definitely our responsibility to partner with them, share our knowledge, our abilities and methods with them to help them get there, because ultimately not everyone can go from zero to, or from whatever to zero in 1 year or 2 years. And as long as these guys are on the right journey and they're doing the right things, I think that's a defendable position from our perspective towards our clients. So to your point, I think a partnership makes more sense than just putting the stick out there and penalizing your supply chain for not having the EDPs and so forth. EPDs.
Thank you, Joanne. So look, we're running over a little bit. So what I might ask is just maybe for a concluding remark. We'll work across the panel. Maybe Matt, you could start, and then looking across my screen, Shay, Isabel and Joanne in that order. So could I ask, what piece of advice, and so what piece of advice would you give companies who are apprehensive about making a net zero commitment at the current time? So one word answers get maximum points given the time pressure. One sentence answers would be acceptable. But please, I'd be really interested in one piece of advice that you might give companies who are apprehensive. Matt?
Yeah, so in terms of this sector, it's about understanding that there is a responsibility because a lot of the global emissions come from sectors such as construction. And the advice is that the pathway to net zero comes with risk, but comes with much larger opportunity. And it's about understanding both and reflecting both within your plan in terms of net zero. So you want to have a vibrant business at the end also. So the steps that you take need to be related to your own ambition, your own commercial circumstance, but ultimately the opportunities of net zero far outweigh the risk.
Thank you. Shay?
I suppose my piece of advice would be every company does this slightly different, and what's worked for another business may not work for yours. So offsets may have been brilliant for a particular business, but another company may not feel comfortable with that. There are some risks around offsets. So don't just follow your peers, I think really have that holistic conversation internally and decide what suits your business the best.
Thank you, Shay. And Isabel?
Mine might be the opposite. I'm going to say just do it. Just get on with it. Do it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about getting it perfect. Don't go obsessing about your peers or whatever. Just get on with it and do what's best for your business. But don't go into these kind of ever decreasing circles of analysing and worrying. Just get on and make some decisions and save some carbon.
Act now. Thank you, Isabel. And Joanne, the last word or words.
Well, when I listen to everything we discussed today, and when I think about the topic, a book comes to mind that I really loved reading some years back. And the name of the book was The Answer to How is Yes. And Peter Block wrote it, in case you want to get it. It's a great book. But I think it sums up for me where we're at is a lot of people get hung up on the how and they don't start. So the book, and also I think we're saying is the answer is yes. You have to first commit to it. First decide you're going to be on that journey and then worry about the how, because now what we've heard today as well is the grants are available for many different aspects of the work you're going to have to do. The help is available if we listen to Shay. And so if you have the how pretty much in the bag, it's just about get on that journey and do it faster or sooner rather than later, as for Isabel.
A great one to yeah. The answer to how is yes. Just act now, do it, get on. The time is short. So no, thank you. And I suppose usually at this stage, I'd give our audience the green light to show their appreciation with a rapturous round of applause. So just for a second, just imagine that's happening. But in the absence of the rapturous round of applause, and I suppose on behalf of our audience and Enterprise Island, I'd like to thank you, each of our panelists, Isabel, Joanne, Shay, and Matt, for your terrific participation and insights, both today and in the report itself. So thank you very much indeed. And speak soon. And so to the final section of today's event, and to run through the supports available to Enterprise Island clients, I'm pleased to hand over to the co-author of the report, my London colleague, Mr. Luke Newcomb. So we'll leave it to you now, Luke.
Thanks, John, and thanks to everyone on the panel, as John said, for some great insight into what it takes to start in the journey to net zero. So I'm here to talk to you today about how Enterprise Ireland can support you on your journey to net zero, and more specifically our climate action funding supports, the Climate Action Voucher, Green Start and Green Plus. These supports are open to all Enterprise Ireland clients, regardless of size. So our first support, the Climate Action Voucher, is a 100% funded grant to engage with an expert from the Enterprise Ireland Directory of Green Service Providers for 2 days. The project cost is €1,800, which equates to €900 per day. The Green Directory of Service Providers can be downloaded from the Enterprise Ireland website. Eligible projects under the Climate Action Voucher must include one of the following activities: so resource efficiency assessment, renewable energy potential, introduction to corporate sustainability, or introduction to circular economy thinking. Under a resource efficiency assessment, resources can include energy, water, and materials. And the main outcome of a 2-day resource efficiency assessment would be a register of opportunities. The service provider will identify resources, emissions, and cost savings opportunities, and will provide information on cost and payback of opportunities identified. The second option under the Climate Action Voucher is an assessment of renewable energy potential. So the Green Service Provider will assess the business and site's energy use and recommend the most appropriate renewable energy system or systems for the business. All renewable energy technology can be considered, and the main outcome, again, is a register of opportunities. The third option is an introduction to corporate sustainability. So the Green Service Provider will review the company's current performance activities and initiatives, and provide advice on developing the policy and initial action plan. And lastly then is the introduction to circular economy. So circular economy means looking to a more circular model of economics which minimizes waste and pollution by design, by keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. The service provider will help you to prepare a plan to identify and develop circular economy ideas for more circular products, processes, and services for your business. And so the application for the climate action voucher has been designed to be easy to complete. It has an expected turnaround and approval of just a number of days. And it's expected that this assignment will be carried out within 6 weeks, and that the outcomes will then lead to further training or technical feasibility or innovation of capital projects. So it'll start companies on a journey of activities. The second support, which we can see on screen, is Green Start. So Green Start project cost is €6,300, and the eligible cost element is the green service provider's fee, which is 7 days at €900 per day. The grant rate is 80%, so that equates to €5,000, and the assignment period is generally over 3 to 6 months. Companies can choose a green service provider from the directory previously mentioned, but it is optional with Green Start, so that companies may select a service provider who is not on the directory, and they'll be approved as part of the application process. Applications are generally approved in 3 to 4 weeks, and under Green Start, companies can implement a basic management system based on a plan, do, check, act philosophy, such as an environmental management or an energy or carbon management system. Or they can carry out a short-term project on a range of different activities, from carbon footprinting to life cycle assessment to sustainable logistics and sustainable energy. And then finally, taking things to the next level is Green Plus. So Green Plus project cost is up to €100,000, and the grant is up to 50%. The eligible cost element under Green Plus are the green service provider fee, which is up to €900 per day, up to 10 project members' salary costs, and training course fees for specialized external training courses that support the project goals. The assignment period is over 6 to 12 months, and similar to Green Start, the directory of green service providers is optional, and applications are generally approved in 3 to 4 weeks. Eligible projects include training the company's green team to align to internationally recognized standards such as ISO 14001, ISO 50001, or to frameworks for disclosure of performance such as the Science Based Targets Initiative, SME Climate Hub, or CDP, and also to help the company to develop long-term sustainability plans. So this is just some more info on the 3 supports, and if you want more information, you go to globalambition.ie/climate action, and you'll see assignment guidelines for each support. The guidelines outline the applications and the claims process and the eligibilities in more details. So this is a pilot fund, and it will be reviewed at the end of summer. So we strongly encourage you to talk to your Enterprise Ireland Development Advisor to better understand how the green supports can help your company on its green journey. So the supports are there to help you to get external expertise, to build in-house capabilities and green credentials, which, as we can see today from all of the speakers, these credentials are becoming more and more important for all stakeholders. Finally, the Climate Action team will be holding a Climate Action Funding Supports webinar on the 30th of June. This will be for manufacturing companies, and it'll include various guest speakers from different Enterprise Ireland companies who will share their sustainability journey to date, as well as provide helpful advice to companies of all sizes. And sticking with the events, just to note that this is one of a number of webinars taking place during Enterprise Ireland UK's Net Zero Week. So we will also be holding webinars on the UK energy transition, local authorities and agriculture sector. And these webinars will provide focused sectoral insights on the key UK net zero challenges, opportunities and markets developments in the relevant sectors. You can register and find more information on our Global Ambition website or on the Enterprise Ireland UK LinkedIn or Twitter. So with that, I'll hand it back over to you, John.
Dropping back in here. Thank you, Luke. A final big thank you to our speakers, and thank you all for your participation and for staying with us 5 or 6 minutes late, so apologies. I do hope you found the insights and information today useful, but please do reach out to either Luke or myself if we can help with your next steps. And just to say, a copy of the report that we've launched today and a recording of this webinar will be emailed to all participants, which just leaves me to say thank you, enjoy the rest of your day, and goodbye.